Well, beginning in March, I'll be hosting a course on my theory of spiritual poetics that I advanced in my dissertation at Harvard University. This will be a bit different, though, from my other courses. This course will be a little bit more scholarly than my usual content. Although the lectures are more academic, they are written so that non-academics can follow along, and they may require a little more study than my usual content. But I will be walking through the major concepts in the developments of Romantic era scholarship and talking about the contribution that mine makes. So in this video, I'd like to share with you my theory of spiritual poetics in my dissertation to show how it works in closely reading a poem, so we'll closely read one, and I'll also talk about the course, when it will meet, and what it will do. So first, let's talk about spiritual poetics. At the first fundamental level, poetics is a theory of how poetry is composed and enjoyed. Poetics defines the very specific power of what poetry is and what it does and how it works. It's concerned with the creative activity of how it's shaped and also how it's received by the consciousness of the reader. Helen Wendler once wrote that poems are enactments of mobile consciousness. And as a result of experiencing a poem as mobile consciousness, it orders experience into something understood by the poem itself. So much of the most celebrated poetry of the Romantics, William Blake, William Wordsworth, John Keats, Percy Bysshe Shelley, is deeply associated with states of consciousness that should be called spiritual, that we might otherwise categorize as spiritual, sometimes ecstasis, sometimes experiences of transcendence. So it's in this sense that I use the word spiritual and spiritual poetics. Spiritual in this sense refers to those transformations of consciousness that produce what we call culture, human cognition, human feeling, human will, as someone like Rudolf Steiner might say. And I'll get to how this works in my longer introductory lecture, but for now I'll say this. Put in the simplest terms, spiritual poetics is the theory that poetry formally encodes and enacts a spiritual experience through the poetic form, through the reading of it. That poems do not just describe a spiritual experience like a document might describe. It's not documentary in this way. It's more of that. A poem is a formal transmission of that spiritual experience, or can be. And developing a vocabulary about how this works is very difficult and something that criticism has been very slow to do, mainly because our lexicon comes from the inheritance of the Enlightenment period of the 18th century with its very rational and materialistic understanding of the human mind. We're going to push those bounds. And since Wordsworth is the poet of spiritual growth, whose poetry enacts that experience in verse, this course will examine Wordsworth's most celebrated lyric poems through this theory that I've developed in my dissertation. So let's take Wordsworth as a case study here. And we want to study how his sense of the spiritual is not an essentialization of institutional religion, as it's sometimes described. A lot of people will claim that Wordsworth's poetry is Christian. It is compatible with Christian. Much of it is. Much of it is compatible with Christianity, I should say. Neither is it the retreat from religion into art, what has sometimes been called secularization. So Wordsworth's poetry does not fit within the categories of Christianity or secularism. It's something else. And this religious power for Wordsworth is better understood rather as the source of poetry. He sees poetry and religion as sharing a common source. This is the underlying theory of spiritual poetics, that religion and poetry both share the same source, and this tension between the spiritual impulse and institutional religion is outlined in one of his essays. So just briefly, in his 1815 supplementary to the preface essay, he identifies, on the one hand, the spirit of religion, which poetry administers and breathes, he says, and on the other hand, religion, usually institutional religion. And religion makes up the deficiencies of reason by faith, he says. Its element is in finitude, and its ultimate trust is in things supreme. But poetry, aligned with the spirit of religion, has what Wordsworth calls a divine origin, and is passionate for the instruction of reason, ethereal and transcendent, yet capable to sustain without external incarnation. without sensuous incarnation, he says. So for Wordsworth, there is a difference between the spiritual and the religious, we might say. These are terms that have been coming. This is the binary that's very popular today, religion versus the spiritual. But it's very, very integral to Wordsworth's own theory between the spirit of religion and institutional religion itself, and poetry being of the diviner origin there, what we might call its spiritual essence. So it's clear that, for Wordsworth at least, the diviner origin of creativity begins with an experience with what he calls the ethereal and the transcendent, and the sensuous incarnation first felt in the blood and then passing to the mind, where it becomes poetry, understood. So the Romantic poets' spiritual sensibilities are often encoded into the poetry itself. This works for Shelley, this works for Blake, this works for Coleridge in different ways. For Wordsworth, he has his own distinct way of encoding his own spiritual experiences, which follow a very particular pattern that once you see it, you begin to see it everywhere in his poetry. For Wordsworth, these experiences usually move from a state of turbulence and excitement into tranquility. And this is the characteristic movement in Wordsworth's poetry, much of which is repeatedly enacted. So if we look at his very short and famous poem, My Heart Leaps Up, we'll see a good example of this. So let me just read this to you. Now we have it on the screen. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So was it when my life began. So is it now I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old, or let me die. The child is father of the man, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. It's a poem, very simple diction, very simple word choice. The poem describes very simple experience of joy occasioned by the sight of a rainbow. And the first line performs that excitement, that enthusiasm with leaps up, which is a spondee. So it's a foot with two stressed syllables. Usually it goes my heart leaps up when I behold. There you have the perfect I ams, but there you have a possible spondee here, which gets two stresses because of the excitement. And it brings the reader to the precipice of this line, which is enjambed, meaning it doesn't have punctuation. This is very significant in the consciousness of the reader. As the reader is coming to the precipice of an unpunctuated line, what we would call an enjambed line, the reader has to hold the sense in her mind as she journeys to the beginning of the next line. That means that the sense is incomplete, and there's this moment of what Donald Davies calls the flicker of hesitation. So the mind has to hold this until we see the object of what he's beholding revealed at the beginning of the second line here. So the object of elation is suspended by this enjambment. It's creating suspense in the mind, and is revealed by the second line here as the object, a rainbow in the sky. And then you have this repetition. So was, so is, so be. This is called anaphora, when a line begins with the same word or phrase at the beginning of successive lines. So we have so was it, so is it, so be it, which establishes a sense of stability by the speaker's wish to enshrine this elation in terms of perhaps even a creed. And then you have this metrically contracted, you see this is the shortest line in the poem, this ultimatum that follows, or let me die, which is very, in a way, violent in its delivery and also in its meter. We have this very excited exclamation point. And this, too, is composed of entirely stressed syllables, possibly. There's a way to read this as two spondees, that is, as two metrical feet containing both only stressed syllables, or let me die. The stress is on all four. And so you have this excitement, this intensity there, this wish for preservation. There's even a bit of anxiety here, and there often is in Wordsworth states of excitement that his poems try to cool and to resolve into this spiritual kind of tranquility. And we see it happening here, right there at this marked shift in tone here at the seventh line. The child is father of the man. Okay, so all of a sudden we have this philosophical statement made. It's almost as if the poet his hair ruffled by the winds of turbulence. He's kind of patting things down and straightening his coat and says, in a very philosophically distant and chaste manner, "The child is father of the man." You see this actually in his ode, Intimations on Immortality, in which the first 4 opening stanzas are turbulent and frantic. And then the 5th introduces this very cool philosophical perspective. That's what's happening in miniature here. In fact, this is also, as Helen Vindler once wrote, a miniature Tintern Abbey. But I think it's also a miniature ode, Intimations on Immortality. So it's a little awkward, too, because you have the repetition of this word man, which, occurred back here in the 4th line. Usually you want to use a different word here, but it's also metrically irregular. The child is father of the man. So you have these 2 unstressed syllables here. It's an interesting line metrically. It's a little awkward. It's a surprising aphorism that gives this chaste distance. So the speaker is kind of distancing himself from this elation. And then suddenly what happens with the meter is you get this couplet, rhyming couplet. "And I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety." Now, of course, I'm syncopating some of the syllables here, as I think Wordsworth would have. What do you notice? The final couplet just resolves in perfect iambic meter, in that perfect ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. And you'll see Wordsworth's poetry doing this quite a bit throughout his blank verse and in his more lyrical pieces, such as this one. Here we have the spiritual sensibility, natural piety outlaid here. This is it. It's the transit from the spiritually excited or the emotionally or sensuously excited to a spiritual state of calm. Now, Percy Bysshe Shelley, William Blake, they always have complete opposites of this, where they begin very calmly and then their poems ramp up into this frantic moment of insight or prophecy. Wordsworth is very different, so that's why we're just looking at Wordsworth in this course. But you notice that the movement from turbulence to tranquility, from excitement to calm, is the hallmark of many of the poems in the lyrical ballads. For figures such as the Boy of Winander, Ruth, the Lucy poems, they all undergo certain movements from life to calm, sometimes from life to death. So, in this course, the first 2 talks are going to explain the concept of spiritual poetics and the latest thinking in Romantic era studies. So I'll discuss the state of the field and how the Romantic era scholars are treating Romanticism and religion more broadly, and I will introduce the latest developments in religious and post-secular theories that my dissertation engages with. So post-secular means, if I were to summarize it in a sentence, it would be something like, we need to consider religion in a much broader way than just Christian and secular. There's a whole category, a rich tradition of literature that actually doesn't fit within those 2 categories, and that's what this very recent study of post-secularism does. That's what my dissertation is doing as well. So that's the first 2 talks. And then the next 4 talks will advance my research by applying a new critical lens to Wordsworth's most celebrated lyric poems. These hour-long lectures are going to be close readings predominantly of Wordsworth's greatest poetry. So on one hand, you'll get an introduction to Wordsworth that's going to be really great standalone, but you also get some insight into what I'm about and what my academic research does. I'm hosting these lectures twice a week. So just to share here, if this casts, so this I'll be delivering on YouTube, an introduction to lyrical spiritual experience. These are the first 2 lectures, Wordsworth and Religion, Intro to Post-Secular Studies. And then we'll get into Wordsworth's conversions. We'll be reading from the lyrical ballads. We'll be reading, next lecture, Wordsworth's permanence. We'll be reading from the lyrical ballads as well, mostly from the 2nd volume of the 1802. And then we'll be reading about Wordsworth's devotion. So a few more from lyrical ballads and some others outside of the lyrical ballads. And then the final lecture is going to be on Wordsworth's ode, Intimations of Immortality. That will be the final lecture, and that's the only poem we'll be reading for that. So I'll be hosting these lectures twice on Mondays, one at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and the other at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and that's to give some participants who are in the UK or in alternate time zones something to work with, and that way all will be able to kind of contribute to the discussions that will follow these lectures. So I hope you'll join us to give you some insight into what's important to me as a scholar, but also it's just a great experience to study Wordsworth and really dig into his poetry and to look at it in a new way. So I hope you'll join us. Find the link below in the pinned comment and in the description, and I hope to see you there. Thanks for watching, and until next time.